Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Brick+Work Podcast. My guest today is Bradley Marsh, who is the co-chair of Greenberg Traurig's U.S. state and local tax practice, former elected chair of the California State Bar Association's Tax Committee, a retired city council member in Lake Spur, California, a regular speaker at legal and accounting events, a thought leader on California tax issues, and an adjunct professor who has taught at UC Hastings College of Law, Santa Clara Law School, and Golden Gate Law School and elsewhere. Hey, Brad.
Hello, how are you?
I'm great. Well, I'm excited for this episode. I think this is the first time we're going to be delving into what's current and going on right now on the ballot. But beyond that, tax and how that correlates with commercial real estate. So I'm super excited for this discussion. So thank you again for being on here. So yeah, I want to get right into it. Kind of if you want to give now your take on what you're kind of doing at the firm and how you're being helpful to your clients and how that correlates a little more in detail, I guess, based outside of that intro that I just gave for our audience, which kind of goes right into what you're doing right now.
Excellent. So I've been doing property tax work for almost 20 years now. That's our topic today, of course, is generally property tax and Prop 15.
Mm-hmm.
I started out at a firm in LA doing just controversy. So we would say there's no change in ownership under Prop 13, or we'd say they got the values wrong. I moved up to San Francisco, where I practice now, out of our San Francisco office. And I expanded my practice a little bit about 8 or so years ago. And so now I, in addition to doing those two things, over the years, I've grown and learned a lot of other taxes. So I do a lot of documentary transfer tax, income tax, sales tax, whatever tax you've got that's not federal income, I probably do it with my group at Greenberg. And most of my clients are large real estate owners, whether they're REITs or private equity or what have you. A combination of residential and industrial, a good amount of agricultural clients here in California as well. And so I help them, in the planning aspects when they're considering an acquisition or a disposition to try to minimize the property and transfer taxes. When they have an unfortunate event like contamination or what have you, to get the values down. And really just the whole panoply of what might come with real estate ownership and state taxation.
Got it. And so let's get right into Prop 15. And this is such a relevant topic, and you are the best person here to kind of let us know. I mean, obviously we're trying to not get too political one way or another, but I think that is kind of everyone still needs to be informed of what it is and potential effects it has. So if you want to go into that, that'd be great.
Sure. So you have to start the story back in 1978. So we have to set the stage about how the current property tax system works, I think, in order to properly understand how the changes are working out. As most people know, back in 1978, Prop 13 passed. And what it did is, instead of creating or staying with the system where market values of property, whether they went up or down every year, was what the tax is based on, they set a new system up. And the system is basically, when you acquire a property, you get an acquisition value. So, and generally that's the purchase price. So we'll use a simple example as we go through this. We'll pick an office building and we're going to make a really easy, low number. We're going to just call it $1 million office building. Okay. So if in year one, you buy this for $1 million and that's what it's worth, then the taxes can only go up by the rate of inflation each year after that purchase. And that rate of inflation, by the way, can't exceed 2%. So for the past, 40 years or more, people have been able to buy these types of properties, and they've been able to predict what that expense is going to be for the life of their property under Prop 13. It's going to be $1,000 of tax at 1%. That's California's property tax rate for each $100,000. So on a $1 million property, they're paying $10,000 of base property taxes, and then it goes up by 2% a year. So in year 2, they're paying $1,020, and in year 3, they're paying a little over $1,040, right? Because it's a compounding system going up. And since Prop 13, every property has been treated the same. So that rule would apply to residential. That rule would apply to industrial, commercial, what have you, up and down the state. Small exception if you're, an aqueduct or a railroad or something like that. But for 99% of everybody that would likely come into contact with this, that's the rule. What happens is historically in California, the real estate values have risen faster than a compound 2%.
Yes.
And so for a lot of owners out there, whether it's commercial, industrial, or residential, or agriculture or what have you, they have some built-in savings under Prop 13. So for example, if we took this $1 million office building and, that was bought, and let's make it bought, 20 years ago, it's probably worth something like $6 million now. Let's just make that as a number up. And it's, even though that compounding's happened, it's not going to be assessed at much more than what, like $1.2 million, something like that. I mean, I'm not going to try to hit every piece of math on this, but that's a lot of savings.
Right.
And, again, looking at the tax rate and everything, we're talking about a savings of maybe as much as $50,000 a year, maybe a little short of that in my example. But that's a lot of money. And especially when you're an investor in real estate and you're doing an income approach, you're looking at your expenses, et cetera, you're doing well. So for a number of years now, there's been a debate in California, and the debate has been over whether this system is fair. And they call it the third rail because, there've been a lot of challenges and a lot of debate about it, but no one's ever been able to change this system for anybody. At this moment in time, what we've got a proposition on the ballot called Prop 15. And what it would do is it would take away that protection under Prop 13 that limits the increases to 2% after the acquisition value. It would take that away with respect to commercial, industrial, and a lot of agricultural property. It wouldn't take it away with respect to the land that the crops are growing on for agriculture, but it would take it away with respect to the processing facilities and everything else.
So only commercial, no residential, right? So residential and Prop 13 will still be.
That's right.
Yeah.
So Prop 15 does not touch residential, and that includes single family homes,
right,
multifamily homes.
Right.
It includes rental properties. Anything that's zoned essentially residential,
right,
should be protected.
Mm-hmm.
There's some areas that are not really clear, and definitely lots of different opinions on it. Whether, for example, a mobile home park would qualify. I tend to think it would. Nursing facility may depend on what type of service is being provided. It may be a mixed assessment. No one knows for sure. So there's definitely some properties on the edge, but generally speaking, this would take away the Prop 13 protection for commercial, industrial, and some agriculture. And it would turn it back to the system before Prop 13. Right. So what would happen is whatever the market value is, whether it goes up or down, that's what you're going to get for each year, starting in 2022.
Wow. Okay. So I guess now, what do you see as the effects on smaller businesses versus larger businesses, or in the whole? What could this immediately do? Obviously, at market rate, the tax is going to significantly go up. And then I guess the cities want this because then their funding goes up. But what are some of the ripple effects if this were to pass for the small businesses and also larger? But I guess in aspect to whether they're the owner of that property or they're the tenants, essentially.
So there's a couple different vantage points that you can look at this from.
Sure.
There are, I'll give you the argument for it, for Prop 15. And the argument goes like this. When I'm leasing, when someone's leasing their property out to a tenant, they're going to ask the market rate. Right. And they're not going to ask for less if their property taxes are less. They're going to ask for the market rate. Right. So the argument for Prop 15 is that there are people out there who are getting windfalls,
Mm.
essentially,
Mm.
because they have old property tax values, and it's not fair
Right.
to the newer owners, to the people with more recent changes in ownership, whose base years aren't as low, or what have you, under Prop 13. That's their primary argument. There's also some sub arguments in there that brought about Prop 15, such as there's been a lot of noise made that over time, Prop 13 has put more of the tax burden on residential property versus commercial. As last I heard, that was debunked by the Legislative Analyst's Office.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of sub arguments, but that's the main one. The main one is, why are we benefiting an old business over a new one?
Right.
For example.
Right.
Okay. Now, the situation that would maybe lead someone to think that Prop 15 was bad is a situation where you have a property that isn't a full service rent that you're offering for the market rate. Instead, you are leasing it on a triple net rate, and so the taxes just get passed through. Right. And that's a lot of commercial leasing. I mean, there's definitely some full service out there, but a lot of it is triple net. And so
I agree. Yeah, majority.
Right. So what happens is let's take up any mini mall you want. You've got a bunch of tenants on triple net leases in there, and the taxes are going to go up, and they're going to get immediately pushed through to those tenants.
Exactly.
And what it's going to do is it's going to hurt everyone who's operating under that, but it's really going to hurt a lot of the neighborhood favorite businesses. And the argument against it, again, is that's bad. Because part of what Prop 13 originally tried to protect was the character of neighborhoods, but then they were focused on retirees and fixed income folks who were losing their homes.
Right.
Now it's sort of these older businesses that are going to get pushed out because they're not going to be able to afford those rents. So that's a big problem. And it's complicated by, look, we're doing this Zoom instead of maybe an in-person meeting because of COVID. And a lot of these restaurants some are still not able to be opened. Even the ones that are likely can only do curbside, service, only 25% occupancy. So there's not a lot of excess profits flowing into any business at this moment. So again, another one of the counter arguments here is that we're really kind of sticking another knife in these poor businesses that are already barely making it.
Agreed. I see. Okay. So now I think that's a fair kind of summary, regardless of what side, just to kind of put that out there overall. But so from what I gather, it's it's kind of the worst time this could be happening again, during a pandemic. I guess the other side of the equation is saying that the cities aren't collecting, or they're also hurting as well, right? Without any sort of federal aid going to, stimulus part 2 to the cities and to the municipalities and the states, that they're going to be running negative on a move forward. But I think, I don't know, from what I'm hearing, I don't think that should be alleviated through killing off the smaller businesses that are already hurting across the state. So, have there been any alternatives thrown around that aren't as hard to swallow? Like, is there any sort of middle ground, plans that have been presented, or anything else besides Prop 15?
Yeah, it's funny. The very first speech I gave when I started practicing in property tax was about split rolls. So this debate has been ongoing for quite a while.
Yeah.
They've had a lot of different other ways that they could have attacked it. Remember, what we talked about a little while back, where the inflation rate from year to year is capped at 2%.
Yes.
One way that they could try to go after revenue would be to just move that cap to 3%.
Yeah.
And that would grow faster and help, the base year value catch up to the market value more quickly.
Right.
Or 4%.
But not have an immediate shock as far as just going right to market value, the tax rate.
Yeah, it also wouldn't cause such potential turmoil. I mean, one of the things about this Prop 15 that's particularly interesting is the the assessors up and down the state, we have 58 county assessors in California,
Yeah.
and their trade group, and I think every assessor, I mean, maybe I'm wrong,
Hmm.
but if not every, 50 or so out of the assessors
Yeah.
are against Prop 15.
I see.
And
I see.
when you think about it, it's because in order to actually assess every one of these commercial properties at
Right.
market value,
Hmm.
they're going to have to increase the size of their appraisal staff by more appraisers than are available.
Exactly.
I mean, they have to train these people. It's not general appraisal. There's special rules on valuation that are required for property tax purposes that aren't the same ones that you would use on a lending appraisal or what have you.
Mm.
And so they're unanimously against this. But
Mm.
if someone had, theoretically gone after a different solution, I gave you one example. There's lots of other ways that this has been looked at.
Mhm.
But if someone had done that, we wouldn't even have to change the assessor staff at all if all that they adjusted to try to increase revenue was the
Right.
inflation factor.
Right.
So,
Right.
it's maybe not, Prop 15 is maybe not as elegant as I think, a good tax policy ought to be.
Agreed. Yeah, I think this is super informative. We're trying to get this out, obviously, before maybe early next week, so that it can inform some of the voters that are our viewership. But yeah, I agree too. With politics being aside, it sounds like the wrong way to go about it. Obviously, there is a need to kind of go after revenue, and it will constantly happen. But I don't think this is the right way either. So I guess I'll leave a couple other topics up for you. Like, so, most of our audience is going to be interested in what's been the theme of our podcast ever since we started, is this whole adaptive reuse, redevelopment demand that's going to start hitting the market even now, right? Like, there's Mace Rich or any of these shopping, center mall operators that are repurposing their empty JCPenney and Sears locations to Amazon distribution centers. There's, I think Hudson Pacific locally here redeveloped the West Side Pavilion to be a creative office, right, for Google, who signed 7 years. So, and there's architects that are telling us they're looking into, redeveloping offices to housing and hotels to housing. So I'm curious to hear your perspective tax-wise on this. Is there any kind of relevant optimization to look at when you do that, as far as, so if Prop 15 doesn't pass and it's just as is, let's say, but there's this whole repurposing of commercial, so do some of these developers have to look at some important issues when it comes to tax?
Well, I think I could talk about tax incentives here to different types of repurposing,
Right.
and how it works. I mean, under current law, and really the way it's been for quite some time, is that in general, at least from a tax perspective, there has been an incentive for local government to permit the increased commercial properties in their areas. And the reason why is because that creates sales tax revenue, and sales tax revenue drives a lot of localities. I told you I was on the Larkspur City Council. A good chunk of that revenue was sales tax revenue from our local businesses. And so and the sales tax revenue will increase at a much higher rate than property tax revenue. So that's been the historical incentive. Over the past several years, the legislature has put in additional incentives for multifamily housing, in particular. That you can hardly listen to anyone in the legislature without hearing them talk about our housing crisis in California.
Yeah.
And so there's been other incentives that are put into place to try to get the residential piece going. If Prop 15 passes, there will be way more incentives on the side of building residential than ever before,
Right.
because the residential property gets the base year value, and is protected from the increases, and there will be more incentives ever to convert commercial property to have it rezoned residential,
Right.
And industrial property as well. I mean, all of that, and there will be much less incentive for there to be new construction of commercial and industrial property. I think that's where this is all headed, so I expect to see that type of a transition.
Right. Yeah, that's fascinating. So, you know, I kind of wanted to throw a couple of, if there's anything you want to share right now, besides Prop 15, if there's anything else kind of that might be relevant, because again, we're more focused on redevelopment and development, providing that value for brokers and developers locally here. But, even the developers or the people that develop, everyone wears different hats, or they wear all hats, if that makes sense. So it's like a lot of the developers are also operators of real estate, right? And so there's this kind of everyone in this niche or industry, a lot of the information we're providing with tax will have relevance. It's not just for incentives for building more housing. So is there anything else you'd like to share or cover that maybe our audience might not have top of mind when it comes to, if being, looking at tax code and understanding how to be very efficient with not being taxed, or looking at your product or asset, so that it doesn't have the tax liability that it normally does.
Oh, I'm trying to think of a good way to answer that.
Well, or any topic you'd like to cover. I mean, I'm kind of with you on Prop 15. I think we really want to, again, educate our viewers, and so that they fully understand what they're voting for and the effects. But as a tax expert, I'm just being a little bit selfish here. I just feel that this is a topic that we haven't covered with any of our previous guests, and you are the resident expert. So I'd like to give the floor to you in whatever topic that you'd like to cover.
Well, I mean, I guess staying on the theme of property taxes, because if someone's listened this way through, they probably have some interest in that topic.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
There's another proposition on the ballot that would amend our Constitution in California to change property tax treatment. It's not going to be as exciting for, in the development setting as you were just asking about, but it may be of interest to those who own homes in California, particularly those people who are or plan on owning their home until after they're 55, or plan on passing their property to their children, and would like to try to have the Prop 13 values of those residential properties stick in the family. And that's called Proposition 19. And that's on the ballot. So that's another one to kind of keep your eyes open for. The campaigns on that haven't been as big in terms of money spend and information out there. It basically does two things, Prop 19. Number one is there's a current statute and constitutional provision that allow a homeowner who owns a property to transfer, to sell that property and buy a different one, and transfer their old base year value over to that one.
I see.
So that you don't get reassessed by downsizing. Essentially, it was put in there to encourage older citizens to downsize. It's only available if you are 55 and older or a disabled veteran.
That makes sense.
And most of those transfers that you're allowed to do are really just in the same county. There's a few counties that allow you to transfer into theirs, but mostly if you're in LA, you can downsize in LA. If you're in Orange County, you can downsize in Orange County, or what have you. This proposition would allow you to move your base year to any county in the state. So that's the plus. That's on the plus side if you are a homeowner.
Right.
On the downside, current law allows people that either in their family own both residential real property, their actual home. If you own a principal residence, no matter how much it costs, if you are one of the few people with a $50 million personal residence, for example, you could transfer that to your children and they get the base year value on it. So no matter what the value is, you can do it. And I help people with these kind of transfers. For example, like Lakefront Tahoe properties, right? Some of those might have a base year value around 200,000 or 300,000, but they're probably worth 10, 15 million or more.
Well, even more so now, from what I'm hearing.
Especially now when we're all escaping the cities. And then they also, under current law, you can transfer $1 million of assessed value, meaning the taxable Prop 13 value of non-principal residence property. And there's techniques on how to spread that out more. This proposition on the minus side, Prop 19, would take away that piece. so that you couldn't, the parent-child exclusion is limited only to a principal residence. And the other thing it would do is limit the amount you're able to save transferring it by only $1 million. So
caps
if
out.
you've got this lakefront Tahoe home, let's pretend it's assessed at $500,000, and it's worth $10 million. It would, after you're done, it would be assessed at, and we can do the math and get it exactly right, but it would be assessed near $9 million. Rather than at the 500,000 under current law.
Yeah.
So Prop 19 may be of interest to people, at least residing in California, that have homes.
Yeah.
So I guess I'll add that.
This is a big year. What's going on this year versus some others? Or have I just not followed it enough? Were there others that were impactful as this, but in different ways? It just feels like all of a sudden everyone wants to kind of make big plays or moves when it comes to real estate.
This is a big year for taxes in California in general. And here's why. It's really simple. If you are a political consultant and you want to pass a tax, you want to have your tax on a ballot in a highly democratic state with a bunch of people who, if you look at the polls here, I mean, 60-70% of people are pro-Biden, anti-Trump. So you're going to get a large turnout. Everyone, this is the biggest turnout you're going to see in any election. And you're going to get a lot of Democrat people turning out, and the political consultants will tell you they're the ones that vote the taxes. And so you want them on this ballot. And so that's why a lot of these things show up this year.
I got it. I get it. And it's crazy. Again, not delving into politics, but typically California has been more conservative, I would say. It wasn't a liberal state years back. I think things turned during Pete Wilson's tenure, where, I mean, a lot of the counties, like I'm in Orange County right now. This is, predominantly has always been conservative, Reagan country, if that makes sense, here in Orange County and stuff. But, it's always just been more the cities that were leaning toward left and democratic, but that's shifted I think this past 4 years. So yeah, great. So okay, I think this has been super helpful. If you one final closing thought I wanted to throw out there. So this is open-ended. So I know you brought up Prop 19. We covered Prop 15. Is there anything else maybe that you provide as far as services that might be relative or to our audience? That'd be great.
I don't have a whole lot more to add. I think Prop 15 is probably the biggest deal on this ballot. Prop 19 is one of those things that may not be important for everyone. It's going to be really interesting to see the last poll that came out. The Public Policy Institute of California put a poll out about last night or the night before, and they polled people on Prop 15, and it has a 49% yes and 45% no right now. It's a 50% to pass.
Wow.
So it's going to be tight. I mean, I think like a lot of what the consultants and the experts are saying about this election that we're going to have in, I guess, 11 days now, it's really going to depend on voter turnout.
That is true.
So I'm going to be on the edge of my seat. I'll tell you what, on November 3rd at night, I'm going to be on the edge of my seat watching this. This will be, if Prop 15 passes, a dramatic change. The good news is we do all this work, whether it's the change in ownership work or the valuation work or anything else, but it's going to be a shift in the way that business is done, and my practice.
And now that I think about it, the redevelopment opportunity that I just mentioned, that's going to accelerate it if it passes, right? Then it's going to be, those properties, what we were talking about is that they're non-performing now, right? These retail strips, shopping centers, because of the small business tenants that aren't paying and because of the loans and liens that are still on there and the owners still have to pay, what we've been seeing is a trend of those owners now looking at what the new highest and best use for those properties are, and they're no longer retail only. They're looking at developers to come in to even buy outright or get in a joint venture to build, a mixed use, because you could still keep the commercial at the bottom level, ground floor, and then you could build units on top. So it serves both purposes, and it's very ideal as far as zoning is concerned. Those type of bigger retail strips that are all over Southern California, frankly. And again, a lot of them are small business anchored, not national, anchored. So I think that might accelerate a lot of these properties getting out on the market and looking for developers to go ahead and develop it. Because at that point, those they'll kill off the remaining surviving small businesses, right, and older businesses that are out there, and they're just going to be vacant. Who's going to want to now, on a new triple net lease, go in there with the new tax implication, right? It's just not feasible.
Yeah, I don't think we've seen all the shoes drop from this COVID situation yet. A lot of the businesses that are there are surviving based on these forgivable loans from the federal government. To the extent that they are surviving. I mean, few are thriving, and it's definitely changed the way that a lot of companies are doing business. But especially if Prop 15 passes, I really think you see the press and you see this large company moved out of the state to Texas, or this large company moved over to Nevada, or wherever they're moving, right? But you never hear about all the little favorite shops that people used to have that just slowly closed down. You don't hear about those on a statewide scale, but I think you're going to see it. I think you're going to see a lot of small businesses closing down. I've been, even in where I live, in Larkspur, California, and when I go into San Francisco, there's a lot more boards up. There's a lot more for rent signs up, and that's with the government support. That government support will end at some point, not just because COVID will get worked out, but also because our national government can't continue to borrow money and put all these assets on the Federal Reserve's balance sheets. It's just unsustainable.
Well, where are we at? Like over 10, 13 trillion, something like that? Some insane amount.
I think it's more like in the 20s, high 20s at this point. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Do you remember? It wasn't long ago that we were arguing about getting past 6 billion or trillion.
6 trillion. Yeah. 20 something. I mean, oh my God. Wow. Yeah, I agree. I think the shoe's going to come off, and I think it's going to be a long road and recovery back. And but again, it's the time. Sometimes it's an opportune time too, and a lot of disruption is going to happen. New technologies, new ways of developing, living, suburban, urban. All of these decisions are going to be made in the next 5 years. Very quickly. we're gonna have to deal with that. So Brad, thank you so much. Super helpful. We'll have you back on. Actually, I'm already thinking of some other ideas as far as taxes, because again, it's this kind of optimization is vital in such a turbulent time, right? And so thank you so much, Brad, and appreciate you being on, and we'll see you guys next time. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.